Hey, welcome back to Dollar Reviews. It's been a week, like we said it would. Once again, it's your brain trust, Brian Gillis, and I'm joined by Steve.
Hello, hello.
So this was, the first disaster flick in, I don't know, how long? At least 4 years, right? Since 2012, probably?
That's the last one I remember.
Yeah, I can't. I'm sure there might have been something else, but I mean, you could count Godzilla maybe, but that's more of a monster flick.
Yeah. Well, it's been a while since we've had a natural disaster flick.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
And some reviews point towards The Day After Tomorrow, and I would say that's very far off. If only making like they probably only made that tie because Roland Emmerich and Disaster and socially tied Disaster as it is.
Well, I guess with Day After Tomorrow, it's more of it's commenting on global warming, and with San Andreas, that's
Yeah, not even
there's this
close.
hype surrounding the big one that's going to hit
Yeah,
California at any point. So it's
which a lot of people believe in,
yeah.
me included.
Well, yeah. I honestly I've been afraid of this one for a while.
Hmm.
It's there are moments like throughout the day where I'll just be in certain like places, especially when I'm driving on the freeway. Like I drive through an overpass, and I do have this thought like that just comes up every time of, I really hope an earthquake doesn't happen right now because that's the worst place that it could be.
Yeah,
And you know what? The
or
movie only
better yet,
augments
in
that
its
fear with one specific shot.
yeah, it shows it. It shows you in your
Yeah,
station
no.
wagon flying off that on ramp.
Yeah, I was just like, oh fuck, like I really,
Could have been worse. You could have
fucking
been at the Hoover
California,
Dam.
man. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's not much to say about this film. I mean, if you've seen a trailer, if you've seen a billboard, you kind of got it. It's The Rock flying a helicopter, and he knows shit about disasters.
What did you think of it? How did you feel about it?
I kind of liked it, but not really. Saw it in 3D for free. I had great seats, sit next to someone. That made it a little more fun. Just kind of talk during the really hard pressed emotional parts that just didn't work at all. Um, but I thought it was fairly pedestrian. It was a popcorn flick. It was kind of fun, but I was expecting something on a much larger scale, and it didn't live up to that.
Uh,
What
you
about
know,
you?
I pretty much agree with you because it just the things that it gets right. I did think that the build up was pretty good as far as
Hmm.
characters. We all know it's familiar family drama that we've seen
Yeah.
in Roland Emmerich's movies.
Plus, you had Giamatti playing the expert.
Yeah, I mean it's it introduces them pretty well to the point where we're at least interested to see how they're going to handle this situation when it actually hits. And speaking of characters, that is another thing I appreciated was that there are no idiot characters. Everyone here is pretty fairly smart and fairly rational, and you do get some pretty good tips on how to be prepared for an earthquake. Which,
Uh-huh.
good God, you guys, if drop in cover under your desk, how many people have forgotten that already? Like,
I didn't forget
I mean,
that.
I don't.
I mean, they do drop and cover under some flimsy desks every
Yeah,
once
no,
in a
I mean,
while.
well, a lot of people, have you been in a situation where like just we get a tiny little quake and somebody runs outside? That's their first
No,
instinct is to run out of the room
no.
or out of
I
the.
mean, I've been woken up by some. That sucks.
You haven't
Picture
had any in
frames falling off
class or any?
walls. Not that I can think of. Maybe something tiny, but no. I mean,
Yeah.
people. I think they have. I mean, I'm not talking to you, but the internet. They have this misconception. Oh, you live in Southern California. You must have earthquakes all the time. It's like, yeah, we do, but you just don't
Like
notice them.
small
They're
ones,
like,
yeah.
yeah, they're like 2.2s, 1.0s, nothing. And if you don't know seismology or anything about it, what the Richter scale actually means, and they hint at it in the movie very briefly, it's that number. It's 10 to that power. So a 3.5 is 10 to the 3.5. And the difference between a 3.5 and a 5.5 is 100 times magnitude. Like it's a big difference. So in this film, they're dealing with what was it, like a 10.25, I
I think
believe,
they said 9.6. Or
9.6.
did it
So
go up to 10?
I think it was a 10, like the big one, towards the end, which that would be a 10 with 10 zeros after it.
Yeah, I don't think that the San Andreas can produce a quake that high,
Yeah.
but it is kind of overblown, the quake itself.
Yeah. Well, it has to be though. It can't. If it was totally sound in science, it would be boring, and it wouldn't be, a disaster flick.
No, but I mean,
But
that is a big problem. Is I do think it
mhm,
tries to be
it
like
tiptoes
true
it.
and realistic at some point while also having the spectacle. It tries to be like true and realistic at some point while also having the spectacle.
because it doesn't go either way,
It doesn't really mix well because
it's not great.
it doesn't really, while there's a lot of detail put in and you can tell they clearly put a lot of effort into
Uh,
it, it just doesn't blend into the live action environments very well.
on top of that, I think the issue is that for the most part, the person you care about, The Rock, he's flying either in a helicopter or a plane or he's in a car, and that distance from this natural disaster kind of makes the difference noticeable. Like he's not actually on it. There's not, there's, I don't want to talk about Mad Max because it's not really related, but whereas in Mad Max, even in 3D, it still looks amazing because everything's real. The real effects, the real drivers, real cars.
They're out in the
and
actual desert.
exactly, and then you got this, and it's like, well, they were on a huge green screen somewhere, or they're not even there. This is all CG.
When I was walking out, I did think about this. As far as, the disaster movie was a bigger trend in the 90s than it is now.
And even more so in the 70s.
Yeah, and I did think about it like when I was a kid of what was the appeal. I didn't really see any in the theater, but what was the appeal of watching those movies? And the big hook for me when I watched Independence Day as a kid was that image of the White House getting blown up.
Yeah, it's still iconic. And I mean, they used it, I can't remember what I watched, but they used miniatures on that movie. It's like the last major blockbuster to use miniatures, and that's why it still looks great.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's, when it comes to blowing stuff up, miniatures look great because it never feels like, it's being manipulated on purpose. It doesn't, the building, when it falls with CGI, it's very controlled no matter how
Yeah,
real and authentic they do it. When you blow up a miniature, then, you blow it up once, it's done.
there's still that chaos.
It's a real explosion that you're seeing, even though it's miniature. But
Or even if it's a car crash.
and when you do it with CGI, it is just a bunch of ones and zeros. That's not to say that with CGI it can't be convincing, because I do think for The Day After Tomorrow that there is some great CGI in there still to this day, even after 10 years.
Yeah, a lot of that snow stuff.
But even then, when you have a massive tsunami hitting New York City, there's still a practical element in there. When they're out there on set, there's like water all the way on, like coming up to like waist level. And it still does feel like a real environment to some extent.
But you can fake that because it's not that hard, whereas, the earth shaking and buildings collapsing and glass going everywhere, the things like that are like rubble.
And there is
much harder
rubble
to
on
do.
set, and when they're in interiors, there is stuff actually falling.
Oh, it works really well, yeah.
But then it doesn't really blend well when you just have like buildings kind of, just shaking from the inside just a little bit. And then outside, you just see entire buildings just like knocking another one down like dominoes.
I think the real problem with this film isn't necessarily that distance between the CGI and what's real, but more so that for such an event film, something that Warner Brothers is putting a lot of money into, that there is such a small cast, was it like 9 people, that it doesn't create enough of emotional core for you to even care about. They don't really show the world in this. It's just about one state. Well, I mean, you could argue Nevada, but that's just, the first act doesn't matter. It's one state, and it's not even just one state, it's 2 cities.
Well, it's really just about one family, and
Yeah, well, yeah.
And it doesn't exactly like, we understand, that they're getting a divorce, and that's, that's fine. Hey, they're clearly upset about it. It's going to get worked out at some point, but they don't bond over anything aside from this disaster and just talk about their dead daughter.
And every time they talk, you don't really care.
Yeah,
you want to see shit blow up. You want to see buildings collapse. You want to see this and that.
Yeah, and when they talk about that stuff, it's like they forget. You know what? Let me let me bring this. There's a scene that just perfectly reflects how the characters just seem to feel about the earthquakes. And it's right after the one hits Nevada, and The Rock shows up at his daughter's house, right?
Yeah,
and he gets the emergency call, and he says he's got to go out, and she's like, "Oh yeah, we heard about that." And he just goes, "Yeah, it's pretty bad."
Yeah, it's gonna be a long day in the office.
Yeah, and it's just like.
Speaking of which, once after he says that, he gets in his helicopter. He's on the phone with his wife, and this is building collapse. And at no point in the film is it even referenced that this guy's being paid to save people, and he basically goes absent without leave. He goes AWOL to save one person. Not even the county he works for.
Well, I do think that, once that quake hits LA, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people were turning back and focusing on that.
Perhaps. I don't know.
It was a very chaotic situation.
I just think that's the real problem with this versus the other disaster films I've seen. Most importantly, something like, like Deep Impact or Independence Day, or you could even say Armageddon, even though it doesn't even take place on Earth really. Where
Well, I think when you get down to those movies, you can at least on a very basic human level, you can connect with it. Here, it's just
there.
Yeah.
I think it has something to do with the ensemble. The more people you have, they don't even have to be good people. Just the more people you have, the more you can connect to the people. And here, I'm saying 9, and that's a real loose number. It's actually closer to like 5.
Well, it's I think in the scale of just compared to the massive scale of a Roland Emmerich movie, like Independence Day, Day After Tomorrow, 2012,
these are all worldwide.
Yeah, they're all worldwide,
disasters.
and that's why you have so many characters, is so that it does help give you a great sense of scale and scope of just how massive these events are. Here, it's only California.
Yeah, it is localized, but I mean, Paul Giamatti at one point says this quake is going to be so big that they're going to feel it on the East Coast. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
That means it's like a global. It's not a global event, but it is a national event, and they never even show these people.
Yeah, you never get the sense that it's going to affect everybody at all.
Yeah. In fact, it's not even the whole state. It's 2 cities.
Well, it's got to be and small Bakersfield.
It's not.
I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah, in the middle, on the way, but like
there's there's destruction all over, but I mean,
yeah,
major cities, they got it way worse. I don't know. I am looking at the budget right now on.
It's big. It has to be like 150.
It's actually 100 to 110.
Oh, I thought it was a little higher than that.
Which, I mean, 100.
That's still a lot.
That's still a big number, yeah. But compared to the blockbusters we've gotten recently,
Mm-hmm.
that's considerably cheaper. But I mean, that is still a lot of money, and it's clearly on screen.
Yeah, I know you didn't see it in 3D, but it looked pretty good. Especially all the stuff that was real. Like there's this one scene we already talked about it a second ago, when The Rock drops off the bike to his daughter's house. Though, it was probably not intentional, but the bike tire was spinning, and that just looked really cool in 3D. I wasn't paying attention to the scene. I was just looking at the tire, going, "Oh, that's not fake." Or like he's pulling away and he's looking in his rearview mirror, and like the mirror, it was not in 3D when it obviously could have been. And I was like, "Oh, okay. You can't force 3D on a 2D plane." I don't know. The experience was fun in 3D, but it was definitely not necessary. And this whole film isn't necessary.
Yeah. No, so what did you? I can't pronounce his name. I'm probably gonna butcher it, but Ion Gruffudd.
Oh, the guy, Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know why he was in the film.
Do you think that they went out of the way just to make the guy an asshole?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I get it. There has to be that guy, and that's kind of a cliche.
Yeah.
But they
it's
kind
not
of
even
just
done well.
No, and they kind of just give him the easy way out.
On top of that, I mean, the only reason he's even in the film is for the climax. I'm not going to spoil anything, but he's a building contractor or engineer, and his building is featured prominently in the film, and that's the only reason he's in it. His character has no other motivation,
and then he's pretty much just easily disposed of after that, just by being an asshole.
But he shouldn't have been in the film. So, this whole film, it was just, I know it went through turnaround. It was supposed to be Universal. I think it went somewhere else, and finally landed in Warner Brothers. And this is the summer of the WB. I think they have like 6 or 7 summer releases, including Mad Max, Entourage this upcoming weekend. And so for them to have all that, to gamble on this, and the numbers, I think it's already got like 40 million. It's probably going to get close to like 50. Next weekend's going to tank. I mean, what is this going to top Insidious 3? I doubt it. That was made for $0, so...
Yeah, it's kind of weird for the studio to be releasing this and then Entourage right after.
Yeah, 4 days later.
Yeah, it's like they're competing against themselves. But I guess that is counter-programming, though. Do you think that the audience for Entourage is the same as San Andreas?
I think it's pretty close. I mean, I am the Entourage audience, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't count myself in the San Andreas one. So maybe they can get it either or. They're definitely both guy movies.
Oh, then there's also the rating issue of one's PG-13, one's R. They attract a different crowd.
I mean, I think that's also why Warner bumped Entourage up to Wednesday so they don't have to compete with Insidious, which is a PG-13. Also, the people that see those type of films probably have no clue what Entourage is anyway.
I do. There is one thing that is kind of refreshing to see. For this summer, especially with Mad Max and Tomorrowland to some extent.
And this one,
Uh,
I know where you're going.
yeah, yeah. The
End of the world as we know it.
no, that's not what I'm getting at. I mean the more of the. I guess I don't know. I kind of get annoyed by this conversation when it gets brought up. Just the use of the term feminist because it kind of makes it sound like
Eh,
when you're talking about a film, it makes it sound like the movie has an agenda, but it's just a small little thing where it's refreshing to see that a female lead
yeah, the
is at least
Alexandria
able to
Daddario
take care of their own
character.
shit. Yeah, and she is the Jake Gyllenhaal character
Yeah,
of
100%.
this movie, just parallel to The Day
Except
After
The
Tomorrow.
Rock isn't as much of a pussy as Dennis Quaid.
She's experienced. She knows exactly what she's supposed to do.
Uh-huh. And she looks good when she's doing it.
Definitely.
I'm sure this isn't just happenstance, but Alexandra Daddario, she's most famous, most likely for True Detective, which is HBO, which is Warner Brothers. So maybe this was their thanks for showing your tits on TV. The president liked you and your performances. Here's your shot at being in the big time. I don't know. She looks good. She's a fine actress. She's just not utilized in this film. No one is. I mean, The Rock is the one exception. Like they do pretty good with him in the beginning, but then the direction is focused on the disaster and not the people affected by it, which is really weird because that's what makes a disaster film so compelling.
I don't. I guess it kind of killed it for me, but just right when the quake started, I knew the whole time that it was CGI, and it was very difficult for me to invest in something that I just knew was not happening.
It's probably, I mean, it's one of those things though where you can't really make an earthquake a real thing unless you got like the universal backlot, like the earthquake set that used to exist, and you're on there
Yeah.
and the whole thing's shaking. But how much money would that cost? And it wouldn't even look good in today's standards. Whereas if you have a flood or rain or snow or fire or Mad Max cars blowing up, like these are things that can be attained physically.
Well,
Um,
I also thinking about it now, I think just maybe I don't find earthquakes that interesting,
they're not that
cinematically
scary.
speaking.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, it's just a good comparison is The Day After Tomorrow. Like, regardless of whether you like that movie or not, that tsunami when it hits New York, the buildup is perfect. Like, there is anticipation there. You know that it's coming for them. They can see it coming. Earthquakes just happen.
Yeah.
Like, there really is no way to build it up. It's just a jolt and it happens, and you're just kind of thrown into it.
Well, except in this film, because they know.
Well, they know it's coming, but like, there's no like, you get the shot of the tidal wave,
Yeah.
and there's like it's creeping towards you, and there's like a menacing shot. You don't see in San Andreas, you don't see like cracks on concrete just getting closer and closer to you as the ground just keeps shaking more and more. There's nothing like that. And I mean, that is having just jolts, getting bigger and bigger. That is realistic to some extent, but it may not be that interesting just cinematically.
I got asked by a good amount of people at the theater after the theater went to Bevmo. It's kind of tradition. If this film was good or not, and I'll tell them what I'm telling you guys. It's whatever. It's kind of fun if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the film. It's one of those. What do you think?
I think it's okay. I mean, I'm
It's
gonna
a
forget
disaster
about
of a
it
disaster film.
pretty soon, but
I forgot about it already,
yeah,
basically.
there's just nothing. There are little things in there that I appreciate it, but there's just nothing that really made an impression on me.
Maybe the only thing, and it's pretty weird, and it's only because of something else that happened. I know you've seen Aloha. I don't want your 2 cents on this, but I've been seeing people post
I'm not
today.
saying anything.
Okay, good. I've been seeing people talk about that Emma Stone is cast as an Asian American in the film, and there's this big hurrah on Facebook and Twitter that I've seen from a couple people. And I'm thinking about that. I'm like, well, what would they think about San Andreas when they find out that Carla Gugino and The Rock have a wider kid than the both of them?
I don't I without I'll get into the Emma Stone one later, but it does seem more offensive.
Yeah,
It's an easier one to pick out.
I guess. I mean, we'll have to save that conversation for another time. Tomorrow, in fact,
Yep.
when we do our Aloha podcast, because I'm behind the times. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to leave us some feedback. You can send us an email at dollar.review@gmail.com if you got any topics you'd like us to talk about, or just you want to say hi. Additionally, you can find us on Twitter, Dollar Reviews. We're going to be leaving some links to our personal Twitters on SoundCloud, and maybe if you're nice enough, we might, throw some things out there for you. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.